The Follies of the Western Mind, Part 1. What is this thing called thinking? If you haven't listened to the audio file which explains how the book's laid out, you might think about doing that. It'll all make much more sense. In this first part, we'll examine the physical process of what's called thinking. In Part 2, we'll look at the ethereal, the philosophical aspects. And then in Part 3, we'll look at how thinking is moulded, boxed in and framed to make people think in a particular way. We'll look at how your thinking has been shaped by others. In Part 4, we'll look at the impact of language, and then we'll bring it all together. So this part looks at what we might think of as the physical process of thinking, at what doctors and scientists say about thinking. What is this thing called thinking? Answering that question is much harder than it first seems. It leads to lots of other questions, few of which have any clear answers. Given that we all think almost constantly, even when we're asleep, because dreams could be regarded as a type of thinking too, it's amazing how little is known about this most basic human process. Let's start with a dictionary. The Cambridge Online Dictionary defines thinking as the process of using your mind to understand matters, make judgments, and solve problems. Okay, that sounds good. That seems to make sense. And yet it already establishes a vital parameter. It says thinking occurs in the mind. Is that correct? So let's ask another question. Where do we think? Where does thinking occur? And the answer to that question seems pretty obvious. Thinking happens in the brain, in the mind. But even here, even at this early stage in our exploration into thinking, the answer is not as clear-cut as you might imagine. Certainly, conventional science and the dictionary tells us that thinking occurs in the mind, in the brain, if we assume that the mind and the brain are the same thing, which may not be entirely right. It says our bodies are controlled by what our minds decide. But we know this is not quite right. It's not the whole answer. Our bodies also have a great deal of distributed intelligence. Cells go about their business and other processes happen within our bodies all the time, without the brain getting involved at all. Interestingly, much of that continues even after someone's been declared dead. Studies show that it's even possible for the respiratory system to continue working for several weeks after someone has been declared dead. If I touch a hot surface with my hand, nerves in my fingers communicate with my brain, and my brain says I need to move my hand away. An electrical impulse is sent from the brain. A thought exists. Move your hand. But is this thinking? Is a natural response actually a thought, or is it something else? Can it be a thought if it's just an automatic reaction? Does a thought need to be something more? Does it need to be something consciously conceived? If a virus or some bacteria enters my body responds. There are actually several responses. There's an immediate innate response, and then there's a slower adaptive response. In the first response, a variety of cells and molecules try to identify what's happening and then prevent or control any risk. But this response varies. It depends on whether or not the invaders are pathogenic, whether or not they're a risk. My body doesn't respond to all bacteria in the same way. It sorts the good ones from the bad ones and responds to the bad ones in a wide variety of different ways. It's really quite smart. Intelligent even. In fact, it fulfills the dictionary definition of thinking. As the dictionary said, thinking is a process needed to understand matters, make judgments, and solve problems. When my body responds to invaders, it's doing all those things, all by itself. It understands what's happening, it makes a judgment, and it tries to solve the problem. But we don't call this thinking. It meets the dictionary definition of thinking, but because it doesn't happen in the mind, and we're not aware of it, it's not called thinking. This comes to another point, and to the question I keep asking: what is thinking? And what is called thinking? Because they're not necessarily the same. In fact, they're almost certainly not the same. We don't consider the response of our bodies as intelligent in the same way as we think about the brain as being intelligent. On the other hand, we do call artificial intelligence software intelligent, even although it's not really intelligent at all. Computers are not thinking. They're processing data. They're switching between zeros and ones. The mind does more than that, or at least we think it does. But we don't know how or what. All this raises a series of additional questions. What is intelligence? And how much does that depend on what we call consciousness? I say what we call consciousness. And of course, that prompts an even more difficult question. What is consciousness? Is the brain the source of human consciousness, or what we call consciousness? Or do the cells and nerves in our body also have some form of consciousness? We'll come back to this question later. Back to the invasion of the virus or pathogen entering the body. As I said, the first response of our bodies to some sort of invasion is about identification, about prevention and control. There's also a second response, which is called cellular immunity. Highly specific cells are created to fight any invaders, but only if the body thinks that's necessary. Oops, I used the word thinks there. Only if our bodies decide that's necessary. That's not really quite right either. Anyway, our bodies respond to a pathogen just as it does when we touch a hot surface. It protects itself intelligently. But we don't call the body's response to a virus or a microbe thinking because the brain wasn't involved. We don't call what the cells do thinking, even although there was clearly a logical, intelligent process at work. Decisions were made. If you think I'm going a bit off-piste here, I'm not the only one. Recent academic studies have concluded that, we need to rethink what we mean by intelligence. Cells do appear to think, in the sense that they have memory, as well as an ability to process information and make decisions. So, already, even at a very early stage of our exploration into thinking, we've discovered that it's very hard to define what thinking is, precisely, to understand this thing called thinking. Another study published in Scientific American in 2024 showed that our brains are not always required when it comes to thinking and solving problems. Simple cells can do that. Actually, that's what the study was called. Brains are not required when it comes to thinking and solving problems. The study pointed out that the bodies of some animals, some sorts of worms for example, actually retain some sort of memory even after they've lost their heads. The paper concluded that the intelligence of living things lies outside the brain to a surprising degree. Cells apparently work together in clumps to process and remember things. So even science is not entirely sure about how to define or understand thinking, intelligence, or, as we'll see, consciousness. Let's ask another question. Does thinking have mass or energy? Scientists and doctors say thinking is the result of electrical impulses, which have mass and energy. But is that quite correct? Is that just because scientists don't recognize anything without these properties? Does a signal on an oscilloscope of a brainwave actually prove that someone is thinking? Or could it be caused by something else? If the brain is not the source of everything we call thinking, how can other sorts of thinking at the cellular level, for example, be measured? Do thoughts, as we understand them, exist elsewhere? I'll come back to this rather strange question in a moment. Let's explore the question a slightly different way. Do all people think in the same way? Is the process the same for everyone? Probably not. It seems pretty clear that different people think in different ways. And that's not simply because they've got different values, different opinions, and different levels of intelligence. Thinking seems to be an aspect of character. If two people get wired to an oscilloscope and both are asked to think about what they want for breakfast, then even if the wave patterns look the same, they'll almost certainly be thinking about different things and in slightly different ways. Different people draw different conclusions from the same information. Does this mean that their minds are wired slightly differently? Is the activity of the brain, the process of what we call thinking, similar to the way people move? People run, walk and move in ways that are unique, which is why modern surveillance systems track people's gait, the way they walk. If people move their bodies in unique ways, do they also think in unique ways? Let's try another question. Some people are smart, and some people are not so smart, like my sister. What makes one mind superior to another? Is a superior mind actually better? Or are all minds basically the same? Is smartness determined by, the number of neurons, the interlinkages connecting the lobes of the brain, or the speed of information transfer? Or is it down to something else entirely? Can someone actually become more intelligent? We know that people can improve memory and recall. We also know that the brain's function decays with age. We know that people can exercise their minds and reduce the effects of this decay. But can they boost their basic intelligence, or can they fundamentally improve the process of their thinking? Or is basic intelligence and the process of thinking hardwired at birth? Regardless of intelligence, can people improve their ability to think? Can they make their minds better or stronger? It's all getting a bit confusing, or at least a bit unclear. All we've done is ask some questions, and we've already found that the answers are not obvious. And that's before we get into the philosophy of thinking, which is what we'll discuss in part 2. So let's again come back to the first question. What is it? What is this thing called thinking? What is it that allows a material brain to generate something that we call consciousness, to generate that palpable, invisible thing we call awareness? Is it possible to measure this thing called thinking? Is there such a thing as big thinking or small thinking, just as there are big hands and small hands? Let's go back to biology and medicine. There's been a great deal of research on neural pathways and the biological functions of the brain. And yet, despite all this, very little is really understood about what's happening. There's been very little research on the process of thinking, which is quite curious, really, because we all think almost constantly. Thinking determines almost everything we say and do. And yet very little serious work has been done trying to analyse what thinking actually is and how it works. We know that doctors can cut bits of the brain away, and they find that this leads to physical, behavioural and memory changes. But they're not always the same. The response varies. We know that doctors can also send signals electrically and chemically to the brain and get a response. The brain can move prosthetic limbs. But none of this actually proves that the brain is thinking. Computers process information, but they don't think. Or do they? Is AI thinking too? Is thinking just a processing of data? I'd say, having spent a long time looking at this question, I don't think so, though it really depends on how you define thinking. It seems to me that there are many different forms of what we call thinking. There's processing thought, which is when the brain works like a computer, and then there's something else. There's creative, spontaneous and random thinking, which seems to be different. It doesn't come through processing. And yet all these things are called thinking. Why is thinking sometimes clear, something that seems to make sense to us, and sometimes not? How do people who are labelled mad think? Is it different? Or does it just appear to be different? Is the process of thinking just the same? Or is there a sliding scale of thinking from sanity to madness? And could that be measured? I had a colleague once who believed that everyone was mad. Quite seriously, she said, everybody's a bit mad. I've thought about that often. Are we all mad? Or at least a little? What is madness? How do some people have special thinking abilities? How do some people see numbers, words, and music as colours? How do those people who can do this see different colours for those words? And why is the colour not the same for everybody who can do that? How is it possible that some of those with autism, some people born with a genetic variation, some people who suffer a brain injury, and some of those afflicted by a disease of the central nervous system, how do they have enhanced skills? Do they actually have these special skills? Or does their affliction just make a universal ability more visible? Is it possible that everybody has these enhanced faculties hidden within their minds? Why do some forms of autism develop late in life or appear suddenly? How can some parts of the brain appear to heal or restructure? And what does all this mean for what we call thinking? The most common types of savants are called calendrical. They have the ability to calculate and memorize dates and days of the week with incredible accuracy. And they can do this almost instantly. How do they access this information or know how to do this? Other savants have exceptional abilities in memory, art, music, mathematics, or arithmetic. Some have an enhanced ability to see or manipulate 2- or 3-dimensional objects. Others instinctively know the correct time, down to the precise minute. Now, all these skills arguably have roots in numbers, in mathematics, in symmetry, and natural harmonies. Is that significant? Why do savants often suffer from intellectual, physical, or social impairments? Let's change tack again. What can drugs tell us about thinking? MDMA, psychedelics, and other drugs can have, or appear to have, a huge influence on what is called thinking. Some cause acute changes in how people perceive time, space, and the self. What's called the functional connectivity of the brain becomes less synchronized, and this effect can last for up to 3 weeks. A study at Cornell University showed that psychedelic drugs reduce the energy the brain needs to switch between different activity states. What does that mean for thinking? Drugs can enhance emotions, such as fear or bliss. It's possible to induce vast changes in perceptions of reality with drugs. In scientific studies, patients report a sense of visiting alternative realities or dimensions. Others report similarities to near-death experiences and increased empathy. This raises a very difficult question. What exactly is reality? Again, we'll come back to this question later. What role does simultaneous thinking play? Now, what do I mean by simultaneous thinking? I mean that we often think about several things in parallel. People think about multiple things at the same time, or at least they seem to. They can drive a car, maintain a conversation, and listen to the radio while thinking about what to eat for lunch. Does everybody do this to the same degree? Can some people think in multiple dimensions and others with only a few strands of thought? What's amazing is that we don't know the answer to any of these questions. What about not thinking? What does not thinking tell us about this thing called thinking? Does it offer us any additional clues? Thoughts pour into our mind from all sides constantly. It's almost impossible to stop the flow of ideas and thoughts. Some of these are the result of external stimuli, but others are not. Some thoughts just seem to appear, as if by magic. Not thinking, clearing the mind of every thought, is actually quite difficult. Try it. Try meditating or emptying your head of thought. It's quite easy for a second or two. After that, though, it becomes really hard. Thoughts seem to appear constantly, as if from nowhere. Stopping that stream of noise is really difficult. It takes a lot of work, although it can be improved with practice. By focusing completely, thinking can be funneled, and all these other frequencies can be dampened or silenced. But thoughts still try to interrupt. Some of these are logical, some of these are random. Why? What about dreaming? Are dreams thinking too? What happens during that delicious time in the morning, between wakefulness and sleep, when the mind keeps drifting between two states, where there's rational thought interspersed with random ideas and images, where the mind wants to wake and sleep equally? Is that thinking? How does thinking differ, and I don't mean wave patterns, I mean thinking, in a mind that's awake compared to a mind that's asleep? Does this differ from a mind when it dreams? And does thinking in sleep differ from thinking in a coma or other forms of unconsciousness? Why do people who wake from a coma sometimes go back into it? Why do some people emerge from what's medically classified as a vegetative state? And why do some people in what's called a persistent vegetative state appear to be awake and yet have no awareness of their surroundings? Unlike people in a coma, those in a vegetative state can sometimes chew and swallow and sleep, interestingly, with their eyes open. They can move, respond to stimuli, and make sounds. And yet they're not considered to be conscious. Are they thinking? This brings us back to that enormous and eternal question I mentioned earlier. What is consciousness? Many years ago, I met someone at a dinner party in Singapore, and she'd just qualified as an anaesthetist. I asked her about how the process worked, about what exactly induces unconsciousness. And she told me that the doctors don't really know. They understand what they need to do to create a certain effect, the effect necessary for treatment, and they get it wrong sometimes, but they don't fully understand how anesthetic works, what it does to the mind, or why such a wide range of seemingly unrelated chemicals can create similar effects. It also appears that large parts of the brain have got nothing to do with consciousness at all. The cerebellum contains about 3/4 of the brain's neurons, and yet it seems to have almost nothing to do with consciousness. While it's been shown that damage to other parts of the brain, to the thalamus or the brainstem, can result in permanent unconsciousness, scientists don't know why. Are these parts the power socket to the brain, they ask, or something more? In the last few decades, new research suggests consciousness depends on the ways different parts of the brain communicate with each other, especially the cortex. But this is just an observation. Doctors don't know. Let's take a fruitier path. What happens during sex? We know there's a change in consciousness. Is there also a change in thinking? Studies have shown that there's a change in consciousness during orgasm, with parts of the brain shutting down, creating a sense of loss of control. Interestingly, having an orgasm with a partner creates a slightly different brain state from having one alone. And research is now looking at how these brain patterns could be replicated, not for pleasure, but to help people ease pain. What about other species? Do they think in exactly the same way as humans? There's a commonly held belief in much of the world that humans are a more intelligent species, the most intelligent. Aristotle thought so, and many scientists think so today. Many people even think that other species and animals are not self-aware. But that doesn't seem right. There's a lot of evidence to suggest otherwise. Simply watching a cat or a dog grieve about the loss of a mate surely suggests that they're self-aware. Don't these animals feel love too? Studies shows that animals can communicate over vast distances. Whales communicate using particle motion. Rats can share information over great distances too. In one famous study, a rat in America was able to help a rat in Brazil solve a puzzle. Scientists wired their brains up and then plugged them into the internet. And one rat helped the other through a maze for a reward. Is that not a form of thinking too? Recent studies have shown that trees can communicate with each other and with the environment around them. Does that mean they think? Plants communicate using volatile organic compounds. Interplant communication protects them from environmental threats. Other animals seem to communicate by smell. Is it possible that the language of dogs, deer, and other mammals is based on scent? But what does that mean for thinking? Let's go a little bit further off-piste here. Studies show that the wave patterns of people's brains can be synchronized. It turns out that the brains of people in particular situations, of lovers kissing, of people playing chess together, computer gamers, and musicians, gradually adapt until they sometimes have exactly the same wave patterns, as if each is tuning into some frequency that's being given out by the other, as if they're able to somehow feel what the other is thinking. Studies have also shown that people's ability to do this can be improved. People can actually learn to coordinate their brains to make them work in harmony. That raises a very difficult question. How is that possible if everything that we consider thinking is held within our heads? Is it possible that something else is going on? Is it possible that some elements of thinking take place outside the body? Otherwise, how is it possible to explain what's happening here? Let's take this one step further. According to what's called the global workspace theory of consciousness, incoming sensory information is first processed in parts of the brain without us being aware of it. People only become aware of what's happening when the signals are sent to a network of neurons, which are then distributed across the brain. This raises a strange possibility and a very difficult question. Are the electrical impulses doctors track on their oscilloscopes caused by thinking, or are they the result of thinking being communicated to the brain? Is it possible that the wave patterns that doctors see are a physical response to thoughts, not the result of thinking itself? If different people's brains can be synchronized, is it possible that some thoughts also come from outside us? Could the processing part of the brain receive messages not just from the body's sensors and the environment, but also from somewhere else? Is it possible that there's a field of consciousness around us? A property of the universe, like mass or energy, that our brains can tune into? As I'll explain later, and in part 2, this is not as fanciful an idea as it might seem. If this were true, if the brain also gets information from some sort of universal consciousness, could that mean that the God created the universe theory is basically correct, just hugely misunderstood? There's not a supreme being, there's not a single creator, but there is a living, conscious universe, developing and evolving, and that it's directly connected to us. We're part of it. Could there be a universal consciousness present in all living things? Is that what gives us life? Do each of us have the whole universe within us, just as a fragment of a hologram contains the entire picture within it? This idea is not mine, and it's not new. It's an idea common to some religions and to many philosophies. It was talked about in ancient times by Paracelsus, among others. He believed that everything that exists in the universe is replicated within each of us. He said, "We all possess our own Jupiter, oak tree, gold, and the essence of every other being in the universe." He argued that the dust of the earth, which is written about in the Bible, in Genesis, and which Paracelsus called the limbus, is used to create humans. It contains every essence of the material universe within it. Humans contain the seeds of everything that exists. We'll come back to some of these themes in part 2, when we explore the philosophical and ethereal aspects of this thing that is called thinking. As in this chapter, there are a lot more questions than answers. For now, though, I think we can safely say that thinking is not well understood. Some of our ideas obviously emerge from past thinking. The mind takes a step along a path that's been created in our memories. But other thoughts are much harder to explain. They seem to appear spontaneously, unlinked to anything else. We have a sudden impulse to go somewhere or see someone, or perhaps we have a sudden desire to take a different path in life, which is a much bigger thought. How can we explain where these strange thoughts come from? Where do these random ideas, those that can't be tied to any obvious stimulus, emerge? How can we explain those impulses that appear out of the blue? Where do entirely new ideas spring from? Could our minds really be linked to some invisible strand of existence not yet discovered? Or is everything exactly as science suggests? Is the world, as the philosopher Schopenhauer said, just our own idea? Does everything we perceive depend entirely on our consciousness for its existence? Schopenhauer said, "However immeasurable and massive the world may be, its existence hangs by one single thread, the individual consciousness in which it exists." Is reality not as we believe, but just a controlled hallucination, as some neuroscientists say? We'll explore the answer to this question and many others in part 2.